All right, well, welcome to Raw Automation Talk. I'm here with Brett Young, John Pillar, Johnny Jones. I'm your host, Brant. And today we're going to talk about our experiences with OEE Solutions. So let's just dive in. All right, so let's go through a couple of my horror stories, and then you guys can just kind of jump in and if you guys have any questions or whatever. So what I typically see is on a plant level, they always start, with a whiteboard or an Excel sheet. Obviously, this is cheap, you know, and they all start from it, and I don't have any beefs on it. Some of them get really good, a lot of good value out of it. Have you guys witnessed this before? Is this common for you
Yeah.
guys?
Yep.
Okay.
That's where you start.
Um, and then the whiteboard's kind of nice. They'll have a manager that kind of walks the plant. If he starts seeing that something is a little off, whatever, they can just kind of go to the line and see what's kind of going on. But there's usually obviously a delay, and then obviously you're not capturing it all this data long term, so you can't analyze it. But unless you're putting it onto the Excel sheet. But anyway, all right, so let's go to the next one. Next one is what I would call the black box type solution. So these are just little, to where you're adding a sensor on the beginning and adding the sensor on the tail end. So they've got in feed and you got out feed. With those both, you can actually subtract the two, and then you'll get quality, which is the rejects per se. Um, Now, sometimes you need to add a couple of wires or a couple of signals, like the run or the idle. Sometimes they come with a little pendant that you can, one might be, a maintenance issue, or number two might be there's out of equipment, whatever. You can modify those buttons to be whatever you'd want, but those are the reason codes. And then a lot of times what will happen is it'll go to a server, and then it will go to some type of client, whatever. The downside to them, of course, is that you're not really hooked up to the PLC, so you're only capturing the reason codes, which are very, very generic. So there's no depth to that. So machine went down, but you have no idea. You just know that it went down and how many times it happened. So anyway, um, so those are fairly inexpensive. I don't know if you guys have dealt with this, but somewhere in the vicinity of, like, I don't know, $4,000 to $5,000 each one initially, and then it starts adding up when you start talking about server, or if this was a cloud solution, then it might be something to where you pay a subscription fee, that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's that system. Um, we ran into a customer that wanted these to be wired up, didn't want to connect to the PLC. And for obvious reasons, some of these PLCs are very old. Uh, who knows where the real original source code was? So you won't have descriptions on any of this. So pretty difficult to figure out any of the logic. Maybe given enough time, you'll figure out, this is the run command, this is the parts, and that kind of stuff, whatever. But just difficult because it's just a lot of legacy type of scenarios. So their easy solution out of that, or I guess the compromise, is just plug in this, at least capture some type of basic OE, and then go from there. And then sometimes it's actually a really good for, like, point of just a proof of concept. So if a plant just kind of doesn't know if they need to dive into $100,000 or $200,000 solution, jumping into a $5,000 solution and seeing if it actually benefits at all, it's not a bad route. So anyway, so then we worked a couple of years ago on a project where it was SAP's MII. I don't. Have you guys ever worked with or seen this software? But
Yeah.
SAP has two pieces of software. It's the MII, and they also have the newer version called DM, Digital Manufacturing. So at some point, I think it's 2027, MII actually is going to be discontinued. They're going to phase that away, and they're coming in with the DM. It turns out that MII is a little bit more customizable, a lot more flexibility. um, but they're trying to go to the DM, which is a little bit more faster to using. I would say more modular, and so they can quickly just make a few screen changes, simple types of OEE, and then they can they can move on to the next customer. So um, if you were designing a web page, it would be the web page companies that allow you more of a clunky modular type. There's you're limited or constrained to the flexibility they've given you, which allows for you to do something or to make something quick, but it doesn't allow the customizability to where you can really dive in a little bit farther in depth. So they're missing that angle on the newer software. But this older one, where I would say where our problem was is that we're sitting there on the production floor, so we know the process, we know the PLCs, we know the SCADA system, which was Ignition at the time, and then they connected through this Pico. Our problem was is once they saw that the tags that they wanted were not there, we had to make those. And so the contractor would call the client would then call us. We would get a programmer to add those tags in there. Uh, you know, almost a week would go by with this back and forth of phone calls and emails or whatever to get what they wanted out of the PLC. And it just seemed like you can't scale at that level because if you've got 30 PLCs on the production floor, and each one of these PLCs takes a week worth of running around, and at minimum it took 3 people just to get this all or fixed. It just seemed like a lot of money and a lot of waste went into it because essentially the well, in this case the SAP guys just really did not want to learn what was on the production floor. They only wanted what was coming at them through the Pico and wanted it all packaged in a nice way. So anyway, my only argument against it would be is that it wasted a lot of time and money, and it didn't even work. At the end of it, they ran this system for only a year. They found that the software was not giving them what they wanted. They found that it failed and crashed. They failed. It was unresponsive at times. And I don't know why they didn't customize the interface to what the customer wanted, but they had a more of a turnkey solution where it's like, this is what we're going to give you, and then that's it. So it got rejected and it failed, and they $325,000 was rejected. Have you guys ever had these types of scenarios? Any experiences? I'm just
Yeah, I think it's very common. I think what happens is managers see the presentation given by these companies and it looks really nice on paper, but I think it's the wrong approach. They're starting at the top and they're trying to make your plant floor fit into a predefined software package. And I think it needs to be done exactly the opposite. If you really want to track OEE, you have to build that in from the very beginning and on your plant level PLCs. And then it's really easy to do if you start
right,
from that direction.
right. And then you are always going to be, and we can go into a little bit later. Here, I'll get through this presentation. We'll go from there. All right, so there was another SAP. They decided to use DM. They called it DMC at the time, but now they call it DM. Um, we went in direct competition with them using Ignition versus their DM software. Because we had access, because we knew the process, we were able to get OEE calculated a lot sooner, a lot faster. They were working on other things like the CMMS and all other things, but by the time they actually got something in front of the customer, it was months later. And I'm just seem to think that if you are going to want OEE, I'm with you, Brett. You just need to start from the very, ground up,
Mm-hmm.
then move up. And it just seemed like it flowed. It just seemed like you got honest value faster, quicker.
Yeah.
I mean, it does take some time because sometimes we're dealing with legacy software sometimes or legacy machines, and so you got to get them on the network first, and that's sometimes hard. And of course, firmware versions and all that kind of stuff. But once you've solved that, then it seems like everybody can log in, make the code inside the PLC, and then go from there. Anyway, um, they and of course, with Ignition being able to get to it, and because we were on the production floor, we knew the process, we knew exactly what tags we wanted and needed. It just turned out that we were able to solve this, give them information faster, quicker. So, and again, they're just going in the wrong direction, and the commissioning time took too long. So anyway,
Sure.
this one was it was a tier 1 supplier up in Michigan. This was in 2000, the year 2000. So you can kind of see that it was 250,000 back then, but it's probably closer towards 445,000. It was using Iconics 32. Yeah, and you almost know that it was OPC DA back then. But they went through the plant, gathered all this data. They were starting to use this at other plants because it was obviously scalable. So once you had the OEE engine, you were able to scale it to other plants. By the time they got done with this plant, in 3 months, they found out that at the corporate level, the whole plant was operating at a OEE of 25%, and they went ahead and shut it down. So what this project did was made light about how bad the plant was. Now, normally you come into a plant and you say, oh, there's some spots or some efficiency that we want to be able to implement. In this case, they were like, we're not even going to try.
Wow.
So, anyway, it makes, and that's one thing I guess about the OEE that it's always kind of interesting to see because it gets political really quick. I think it's just kind of funny that it could include being so good that it shuts down the plant. But anyway, there was another customer we had. We didn't get implemented, but we had to come in afterwards. So what they did is they went through the whole plant. Well, actually, it was a proof of concept at one point, and that was fine. But they had a cute website. It was, you could drag and drop some stuff. You can see all kinds of gauges. Oh, John, are you seeing the screen? Is that what you're getting at? Does that ring some bells?
Yeah. I might know what this is. Yeah, from that screen.
Yeah. So the problem was, and maybe you guys saw this on the other video, was we would have an operator say it went down for maintenance issues, right? And then the maintenance would scoot their car over, and then they would start, logging that it was an operator issue. And so on their website, you'll see it, but these guys are just arguing back and forth about who's at fault, and it became a complete utter mess when we were starting to look and analyze the data. John, we talked about this before we recorded. How can you trust an operator to select the right reason codes? Sure. And it doesn't have to be a scanner, right?
Right. I mean, like I said, this is a different point from where I was coming when we talked that before. If a person is constantly lying and you have, or constantly telling their perspective, and it's their perspective every time, at least you have a data point from that person. If you have what you just described here of just finger pointing, now that's a personnel problem. That's not an OEE problem. That's not a controls problem. That's something that the upside has to deal with that we can't deal with at that point. But yeah, I hear what you're saying in this now. But what I was trying to make the point of is, as long as data is consistent and you're measuring then a percentage off of that consistent data, you then can make a decision off of that percentage, even though now then you decide to get rid of that operator, you decide to get rid of that maintenance person, and your number makes a drastic change. Well, that's a different problem that now you messed your analytics up. But there it is. As long as the sensor is lying to you every time, right? If it was negative and when it was supposed to always be positive, but it's constantly negative, you can deal with that in your analysis, right? So, but yeah. Human
And then
error,
another
and
system.
human
Go ahead.
fault. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another system I was able to see was just that they've had, and this sometimes this happens, but they want, if you go with the reason codes, that's only like, if you only give the operator like 7 reason codes, right? You don't have a lot of visibility or what really happened. So they expand this, and I've seen it as bad as 150 reason codes.
You can't do that. Yeah.
And then what one person mentioned is that they've seen the same thing, and what happened is that what they realized when they were recording the operator is they were only selecting what was easily selectable. So they didn't want to scroll through, to find the right reason. By the way, first shift operator might think it's different than the second shift operator. So how do you close that narrow? You want the visibility and you want the flexibility, but then you want it something narrow. So it's a hard gray zone with how you want to do reason codes. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have enough, you end up with a large bar list of other for the problem, right? Because you always have that catch-all answer, and so that's now okay. I need to solve that problem. One of the answers too, maybe just it was in part A of the machine, part B of the machine, part C of the machine, or part D of the machine is where the problem it fit. At least then it drives you into that spot rather than the operator isn't the engineer, the operator isn't the technician, right? So to ask them, other than I didn't have parts, the labeler didn't work, maintenance came and fixed it, light bulbs were out, something simple. It still has to be something that, for the lack of a better term, my mom could answer the problem to, right? And if she can answer the problem, well, then it becomes valid. If it's more than that, you need an engineer there. You need a technician there, right? So it's a lot to look at. It's a lot to think
on. Well, that's all I had as far as experiences. What have you guys? What is in your experiences? What is the worst? Without giving obviously names or whatever the case is, but what has been your worst OEE solution? Obviously, you probably get. To me, I usually get involved when something or a machine has lied or an OEE solution has lied, and now they want to take it to the next level. Is that the same case for you guys?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I see the problem of, the third party software that works great in a perfect environment, and trying to make it fit this legacy system. That just, I've seen that fail so many times. It just doesn't work.
So your slide 3 there is essentially the company that I jumped to after leaving Purdue. That other than cute little boxes like that, we had Raspberry Pis, which was another problem in its world. But it was a SaaS solution, right? And they brought me in to be the guy to figure out how you connect a Cat 5, because all they thought of was the OEE cloud level. That's where they were. That's where their moneymaker was. But we had to connect to a field. So how do you connect a Cat 5 to a DIN controlled box that has RS-232 on it? So and move that line down that was the reason they tapped me. I had worked with them with one of my other clients and from my consulting company and got it into that. So I'm fairly familiar with this process right here. It to your point, Brett, and to your point, Brant, the solution was, I know how to do it if everything was on a server. Now all I need is data, and so then I can do it. So just give me data, right? And that's the presentation. That's where they come from. They weren't on the plant floor. We did have certain verticals that we worked with, and they had been working with them for a good 4 or 5 years. So there was some expertise. There wasn't new information where we were working. It was in a fairly consistent space, but that was where I came to that realization really quick after coming into them was you guys don't understand what you don't understand, right? There we have 100 years worth of doing automation from relays to PLCs and up, and it had absolutely nothing to do with servers and clouds and internet, right? I just like you guys, I grew up in this place where we went from serial to Ethernet on the floor, and we were the masters of the 192.168 networks, right? And they became the masters of the 10.10 networks and had Chinese hackers fighting them, right? So there's a different world that we grew up beside, and suddenly we're taking these two worlds and jamming them together. It's kind of what it felt like to me. And they had all the answers because they had all the fights, and I was just an ignorant hick that worked with motors and three-phase and electronics and networks, right? So it was just that kind of a pattern, and it's taken some time and some hurt feelings along the way to understand this process. I think ultimately industry is getting better, right? They're getting better answers. There's still value. There's value to that SaaS solution. Like you said, I could put a sensor here and a sensor here, and I can get the data, which then starts driving you to those $400,000 solutions. You have to start here for proof of concepts. There's value there.
Yeah. And then, well, as long as the customer knows going in, I'm by the way, I'm perfectly fine with this because it's definitely a proof of concept. Does it provide value? My only problem was like this one, where they did the whole plant.
Yeah.
And they spent $500,000 and $250,000 for per year for a subscription, and within no time they realized, after a couple of months, they're like, oh shoot, it doesn't. We're getting lied to from the operators, and it doesn't provide us real depth to it. That's all.
Right. So the technology, right? If you didn't have those human factors, the technology would have worked here, right? That wasn't the failure piece, right? That's where I'm coming from in this. So now you have a training problem, you have a human problem, you have an ops problem that needs to be solved. And there's human engineering that needs to be done. You got to have better reason codes. There's a learning path here. So that $500,000 isn't wasted if that's $500,000 worth of install and material, right? Now you got to learn how to use your tool, right? How many times do you use a hammer the wrong way, right? Until you figure out it's easier to hit nails with the head side, not the claw side. But sometimes you got to turn it sideways because you can't hit it the right way because you use the tool a different way, right? It's just, that's what we do. And that's the beautiful, I think that's where guys like us are coming from. And I think this is where you're saying you have to know from the field up, but you also have to have the people that bring that stuff down, right? I personally don't want to learn how to automate in AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, right? I'm glad there's another guy that does that I can punt, an OPC off to, right? We got to work together. And I think it's great. I think personally, as an academic, I look at this and I think what we're doing is creating the OT department, right? That doesn't exist anywhere yet. IT didn't exist when I started. IT was the us, because we knew how a printer was plugged into a parallel port and we knew what a driver was. And so all of a sudden you were the IT department until they hired a guy who had Cisco certifications, right? So that's what I'm thinking. We're on a cusp. I hate the idea of calling it Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing, all that, but that's what we're the cowboys in that generation of this, and that's why I'm excited here in this piece. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Let's dive into that. So this particular customer, I mean, this is going to sound really bad, but but they would bus the employees, their contractors in. They didn't own cars, and this was way before COVID and all kinds of other stuff where there was a lot. So let's think about this in 5 years, whatever case is. It's finding resources right now. From your opinion, from when I see these manufacturing plants struggling to find people. So they're going to be cycling in and out, whatever. Uh, getting somebody trained to do the right reason code when you give them an option, I think I'm starting to lean where this is a failed solution, not for the future. It's quick, and I won't say that it won't provide any value, but I think the reason codes. My argument is that years from now or now, those reason codes need to come from the PLC, but that's just me. So it's automatic. Now there's more labor to find the reason codes because obviously you got to go into PLC, and then now you got to spit out these reason codes and that kind of stuff. So there's more engineering time into it. But my argument is that manufacturing is going to have cycle a lot of employees, and so that's where you need to head. That's all.
So I think my answer to that is that's great when you're starting brand new at a greenfield site, but a brownfield site where we're still running a slick, and that's, I mean, what reason code are you going to pull out of that, right? So there is a handshake somewhere between here and there. I don't know. So
yeah,
and so again, I need to engineer it. I need to make it so that the reason code makes sense. And I think we were talking a little offline on something on this where I don't ask them engineering questions. I asked, did the label maker work? Did you have enough parts? Was there a failure in the middle of the machine, the front of the machine, or the back of the machine? You ask, Sesame Street level questions so that you get the red, blue, or green answer. I don't want to talk about cyan and teal and mauve, right? So
I do like your idea of like, can my mom figure this out?
Yeah,
that's a smart way to think of it.
That's
go ahead.
No, that's my job as an engineer, is to make their job easy. They're my customer. No matter how simple they are, I don't want to run that machine. I want to make it so that they run that machine and tell me how to fix it. So now how does a person inside of a car find out that the tire was flat if they can never get outside of the car? Well, when I drive, it goes bump, 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 bump. Okay, now I need to be smart enough to know that when they're bumping this way, it's probably on the passenger side, but when they're bumping this way, it's probably on the driver's side, right? That's why I have the 3 degrees on the wall.
So let's go back to your solution that you with the Raspberry Pis, right? So and I know I'm going to offend a couple of people with this, but how do they hold up into an industrial area would be my first question.
Sure.
Second question would be is what type of users did this provide? Did this solution provide it for just a corporate? Did it only provide? I mean, did operators, were they able to see, decent data? Now, did you find that somebody brought a screen to the operators or the maintenance so they can solve the problems as well?
So if an operator was involved in that situation, let's a quick answer, right? It was simply for a reason code. So they had an iPad and they would flip a reason code. So their list of reason code. You have a barcode reader. They would have just selected a drop-down box of reasons. And there was the other, right? The data was presented to the process engineer, the plant manager level, right? That's where they were seeing the data. They were watching their dashboards of what was going on. The Raspberry Pis were simply the data that was being collected. They didn't have the Pokeyoke screen there, or whatever you want to call that, because the operators operated the machine and they made the machine operate. And if they were doing it wrong, someone came down and said, "Hey man, your OEE is wrong. This is what you got to do." That really was ultimately the answer. The Raspberry Pi question is a separate point to it, but and to be fair, they weren't Raspberry Pis. They were industrially hardened Raspberry Pis, right? It wasn't a Raspberry Pi off the shelf, but fundamentally it really was. It did not matter, interesting enough, if it was a very hot or a very cold environment. The problem, so now I gotta turn off my electrical and motors and 3-phase and flip on my process and circuit board level discussion of my degree. The problem was that the UART, there was a single UART on the board, and that single UART was both managing data traffic for the Wi-Fi and data traffic for the serial USB port. And so we were over pegging that UART, and we were cooking the chip at 85 degrees C on the chip, no matter if it was cold or hot or anything. So that was not a fundamental misunderstanding of how plant management worked. That was a fundamental misunderstanding of the architecture of a Raspberry Pi. So there was another problem that lied in there that, like I said, my electrician dad in my industrial controls world wouldn't have thought of, but my master's degree in electrical engineering technology and understands what the term UART means, kicked in and went, oh, well, that's stupid. So it didn't matter. We were pushing the bandwidth on the Wi-Fi and we were pushing the bandwidth on the USB 100% on both levels. And turns out you can't fire both barrels and expect them not to melt at the same time.
So what was happening? Were they able to? Was the operator having to go to the machine itself, say it was some kind of filler or whatever the case is, and saying, "Hey, we're going to run this 6-pack or whatever the case is," and when they would have to go over to another unit and say, "Hey, this is what we're going to run. These are my target rates."
Sure. So some of it, if there was a more modern PLC, they used that term, and it made me laugh when they used that term. But if it was, let's just use an S7 or a controls logic, right? We had an Ethernet port on it. Normally, we were able to pull that memory and pull it into an OPC. So we had some of that data, but there was still data on the line that we had to collect, and we collected it with Raspberry Pis and pushed it up with Wi-Fi. And so each one of those Raspberry Pis were MQTT up into our cloud, and then we were OPCing an MQTT up to the cloud for the rest of the data, and then they were utilizing it. So it was like a dual path kind of solution.
Got it. Were you using like a Red Zone software? Okay.
No, it was all their homebrew, man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting. So the fundamental problems with that is obviously the Raspberry Pi was not industrial enough for what you guys were doing, but it did provide. I mean, obviously, fairly inexpensive.
Yeah. So I mean, I started at the company, and my job was to work with the team that was doing the installation. I was their senior install guy, right? That was mentoring the group of guys and girls that were going out and installing those Raspberry Pis and pulling the data and working with the projects. It was a short-lived run because those obvious problems that we were running into, when you have an entire fleet of Raspberry Pis being your solution method, that we ended up taking that answer and saying, we have to come up with a different solution. We would grab a bunch of Bretts that were local that said, and all we tell you is, I need you to collect some data with a PLC, and here's the data I need you to collect, and push it to our OPC this way. And that was our then solution, right? You would just grab a micro 850 that had those sensor datas, or go grab a Click because it's cheap and I don't really have to program it. And it was just an IO server that jumped onto our Edge product that then moved on, right? So it was a most of the time, everything feels like, when you're in that world, it feels like you're creating a senior design project that looked really good on the bench, and it got you venture capital money, and it got you moving forward. And then when you hit the ground running, you found all your errors and all your misassumptions because you didn't grow up in the world that you were now trying to live in, right? You didn't know what you didn't know until you hit it, found it. I'm excited for them. They're still very successful, but the division that I went there to be doesn't exist anymore because of those obvious failures we're talking about here.
Right. Yeah. So let me ask you this. Now, obviously, all this data was going up to their cloud service, right? Yep. So that it was a subscription based or yearly. Yep. It was some kind of.
Absolutely. That's the only way you make money in that process is you charge them $10,000 a month to look at a pretty React screen, right?
but you're not. My only problem with this is that you're not owning that data, right? So as soon as you
Yep.
stop the service, all of a sudden all that data goes away. So
it's
anyway,
like
okay.
posting your pictures on Facebook and thinking they're yours. Yep.
Right. Yep. Yep. Brett, have you seen any kind of like what was your worst solution you kind of ever seen?
It was very similar to this, actually slide 3 that you presented. I've seen a lot of those.
Okay.
Yeah, let's look at that. Yeah, where they come in and there's a reason code, and you try to, like, maybe the PLC is locked out, so you don't have access to it. So you try to put some sensors on there, and it just, the I would much rather see that money be put into the infrastructure. And while you're making those capital improvements, you can build in your OEE, and then pick it up to like Ignition or something. The successful ones we've done, we've used Ignition, and it works great for that. Using perspective to make dashboards, that's a fantastic solution.
Right. And you guys are both Ignition users, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty agnostic, but yeah.
Yeah. Have you what other systems have you guys used before? I mean, any other preferences, or are you guys starting to narrow it down to Ignition to use Ignition, or do you guys still open for Factory Talk, Wonderware, that kind of stuff?
We're open. I think, new installations, we're probably leaning more towards Ignition because of the price point. It allows you basically more money for development. You can make a really nice solution.
I would prefer Ignition, but right now I'm neck deep in Factory Talk. So
Okay.
it just happens to be where you are and what's going on.
Right.
Most of where I'm at is like we said, was brownfield. I have to work with what they have, right?
Right.
So they've already, you don't, it's really hard to explain to somebody that, oh, you already sunk $500,000 into this. We should rip it all out and start over, right? That's not a good discussion.
No,
So,
that money's gone.
Yeah, you don't win.
It is so difficult to get. I mean, it literally. I mean, this is my own experience, but PLCs seem to last almost 20 years.
Yeah.
But Microsoft seems like in the last 20 years, of course, we were on 32 systems and we had to migrate to 64, and they fought tooth and nail, especially with some of the customers. I made the mistake. Some of them, I just gave them virtual machines, and they're like, "Look, it works great." I'm like, "No. When I give you this, maybe a few years, but we're going to do something else." And then, of course, it's just like, no. We're going to go 5 to 7 years. We still have, XP machines. And I'm like, no. This wasn't, I did not, I built a Frankenstein is what I did. I allowed them. They all deserve the golden sticker for keeping things so long. I give them credit for it, for being so fiscal, responsible. But have you guys, I mean, obviously you guys have dealt with the same problem. Plants not being so eager to migrate over.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think though, once from what I've found, most of the time when they make that decision to upgrade or to improve the infrastructure, it always pays off.
Yeah,
what I do.
Go ahead.
No.
What I found, I mean, Brett made the best ideal is that you end up telling them this is where you work with them and you say, this is where we want to go. This is our goal. This is our star. And this is where we are. And these are the pieces that I'd rather spend that $500,000 on, and build your infrastructure and build your network. Because everything, when you walk into a plant, everything has been jammed here, jammed here. And you're working with decisions of a guy who didn't have any long-term plan to be there. Right. I mean,
yeah,
I'm at a place right now where I'm like, how many times do you want to just throw another micro 850 at this? I mean, because that guy got his 30 grand and he moved on, and now you're stuck with it. And it's where you're at. But what I found, Brant, and I akin most of this to how do you explain to a plant manager, a facility manager, somebody that I need you to spend whatever the number is. Just let's use 100,000 because it's a round number. I need you to spend $100,000 on a network, right? It's here's some network switches, here's some Cat5, and he can say, but I can spend $100,000 on that machine, and in a year, if I don't get my ROI out of that machine, I can put that machine on the eBay and get $80,000 out of it. You can't rip $100,000 worth of network out, right? So that's where that long-term promise is the hard piece right now where we're at. I don't know what you're going to do in 10 years if you don't spend that money, but I know in 20 years we don't need to worry about it because you're not going to be here, right?
Yeah.
So in northern Indiana, where I'm at, we had the fourth car company of the U.S. Studebaker was right here. South Bend still is. The South Bend Cubs. One of the mascots is named Stu because it's Studebaker, because we still really want them to be a car company here. That's how bad it is, right? Bailout Studebaker stickers are sticking here when the GM and they were bailed out. Okay. And so around here, I use the term of, I ask, Clem Studebaker was a blacksmith in South Bend back in the 18 diddly doos, and I ask him who was his biggest competitor in the city, because he had Marty down the street, which was his best friend, but also his biggest rival. It existed, and the answer is, well, I don't know, John, and my answer is because they didn't put a motor on their wagon. Right now, his family only made it to the 1960s, but I don't know how you're going to get to the 2060s if you don't spend something on this, right? That's where I try to come from on this process, and it's really hard to explain to them. We need to know that you want to be here after the 2060s, and to do that, we got to spend this money along the way. It's not going to instantly solve your problems because we decided to pick the right reason code.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's 100,000 for a network, or whatever case it is. At the end of it, you still have zero ROI.
Zero.
You just started. So
you might get your emails faster.
Yeah.
And
what I always find is when we, and let's go back to your main goal thing. There's a lot of patchwork. We call them cheap and dirty, which my business partner hates because he doesn't want any part of it. He's tired of it. It's just been done throughout. There's no standardization. And then all of this causes technical debt when you're ready to really do some real stuff to it. So anyway, it's but they all seem to have 10,000 to spend or 50,000 to spend. It's very, very hard to get them to spend 100,000, 200,000, or 300,000. Anyway, the only people that I know that can pull those off, the 300,000 stuff, is anytime when the SAP guys come in and you've got to shake hands with 5 different guys. Then those are guys. I don't know how they sell it, but
it's like IBM. Remember when IBM used to show up to people's places?
Right. Right.
And then take an entire floor to put a computer in.